Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So, for plant health, they refer to international standards, guidelines and recommendations developed under the auspices of Secretariat of the International Plant Protection Convention. These are the international bodies. They set the standards and that can be used for harmonization of the sanitary and phytosanitary measure rules by the member states. Now comes if something is not included, then what can be the method adopted, or how about the guidelines for those matters that are not included in either of these categories, that is plant, animals categories. For the matters not covered by these identified organizations, standards, guidelines and recommendations promulgated by other international organizations open for membership to all the WTO members as identified by sanitary and phytosanitary measure committee may be applied. So, in such cases where these three pillars or these three organizations, they are not covering certain, let us say, aspect, or they are not covering certain varieties of plants, animals. So, then what can be the standards for those not covered? So, that in those cases other international organizations, that is the standard set by other international organizations, can be included by the member states for setting their standards, but that has to be identified by the Committee of Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures. So, it should be those standards from the bodies other than these three listed bodies that can be included if the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Committee has ratified it. Risk assessment, this is important here. It is something that can be compared with the precautionary, let us say, principle that is adopted in environment protection, because in case of the environment protection and the precautionary principle adopted, there is also the criteria to know the risk, or one should be aware that what is the risk involved, and then only the precautionary measure should be adopted. So, similarly, the risk assessment is essential here also. The risk assessment is defined as the evaluation of the adverse effects on human and animal health from additives, contaminants, toxins and disease causing organisms in foods, beverages and foodstuffs, or the likelihood of entry, establishment or spread of a pest or disease and are associated or any associated biological and economic consequences. Now, the risk assessment here otherwise also become important, because there can be foodstuffs or the kind of infection that is not known earlier. So, usually those sanitary and phytosanitary measures, they put checks or they apply laws and regulations based on certain tests or based on certain records that this bacteria is known to create these kind of infection, this influenza is known to create these kind of infection. But what about something new bacteria is there, or there is a new kind of infection is there? So, in that cases how the nations will react to the foodstuff that is going to be imported. So, in those cases when there are certain criteria adopted to know the risks by certain tests, and if the risk factor is very clear that in case such foodstuff is imported, there are chances of, let us say, new kind of epidemic or new variant, let us say the new variant of corona. So, why to go for that, even if there is no hard scientific data available. So, that is what we mean here by the risk assessment. The evaluation of the adverse effect, what will be the nature of adverse effect if those foodstuffs are imported, that means that should be linked with the level of risks that are involved. The evaluation of the adverse effects on humans and animal health from additives, contaminants, toxins and disease causing organisms in food, beverages and foodstuff, or the likelihood of entry, establishment or spread of pests or disease and any associated biological and economic consequences. That means any outcome or any result out of their entry into the market. Appropriate level of protection is defined as the level of protection deemed appropriate by members establishing the sanitary and phytosanitary measures. So, the level of protection should be quite reasonable. It should not be of a very, let us say, unexpected standard, where there is a very remote possibility of any such infection, or there is hardly any possibility of any such infection, but still high standards are maintained, or the level of protection is not reduced to the entry for the entry of that product. So, how we like define this, the appropriate level, that must be reasonable, depending upon what the people in general are prone to, or the extent of immunity the people in general do have. The level of protection deemed appropriate by the member establishing the sanitary and phytosanitary measures to protect human, animal or plant life or health in their territory. This is also referred to as acceptable level of risk. So, some risks they are not counted, or that we know it will happen, but this does not mean that even if there is a minor risk, then still the prohibitions are introduced. Pest or disease free areas. Now, we have to be a bit more selective also, like sometime we come to know that there is a bird flu, or there is some kind of influenza, avian influenza, and maybe that is only confined to a particular region, like if there is a big country, but this influenza or avian influenza or any such infection is only confined to a small place. So, based on that, it can't be that entire food stuff coming from that particular region is restricted. So, that means that may lead to some kind of protectionism, or that may lead to some kind of arbitrariness. So, if it is declared by the exporting nation that the food stuff that is being exported is not from that particular region where there is infection, and proper care has been taken, or due care has been taken for the food stuff that is coming from the different region. For example, let us say country X, it is a big country, and north of that country X there is a infection, bird infection or bird flu is going on, and there is a wide gap from north to south region, and the country declares that the bird meat it is sending is from the southern part of the country, and it is sent after taking due cares and after doing all the proper certification. So, if the importing country still puts the restriction from the bird, that is the bird meat that is coming from country X, on the ground that the country X having facing this crisis, so that may lead to some kind of arbitrariness. So, that is why these it is a defined that the nation they can define or declare that to what extent there is an effect of this infection, or to what effect these problems are being faced. And after making the declaration, they need to mention it in the labeling also, that this is from infection free area, or this is checked that there is no infection in the food stuff that is coming from that particular region. First is, so for that reason what is defined here, pest or disease free areas, an area, entire country, part of the country, or parts of the several countries, an area as identified by the competent authority in which a specific pest or disease does not occur. So, here as I was explaining you the example, like there is a north part of a particular country, and then there is a south part of the country, and just take the example that the southern part there is no snow, neither they have the snow, and in the north part there is a snow, there always is a snow, and the infection that we are talking about, or let us say any bacterial infection we talk about, that do happen, but not in the snowy region. So, how can we apply the same yardstick for the food product that is coming from the north part of that country? So, that means if it is declared that this area or this part of the country or the entire country is disease free or infection free, so that must be taken care of. An area, entire area, part of the country, or all parts, or the several. as identified by the competent authority, but that should be identified by the competent authority, the extent of infection that nation is facing, in which specific pest or disease does not occur. Next is area of low pest disease prevalence. So sometime it can be that the region that is very negligibly infected by the infection, or there are very rare cases of infection. So whether that can be accepted for the purpose of trade in food products or not. So there, if an area is declared, there is a very negligible level of infection or prevalence of that disease, that can also be acceptable. But then again, it is for the competent authority to verify whether that area is almost free from the infection, or the food stuff that is coming from that particular place of the country is free from infection. An area, entire country, part of the country, or parts of the several countries as identified by the competent authority, in which a specific pest or disease occurs at low level and which is subject to effective surveillance, control, or eradication measures. Then is the basic right covered under Article 2 of this measure. This article recognizes the rights of the members to establish sanitary and phytosanitary measures at the necessary level of protection for human, animal, and plant life and health, as long as they are not inconsistent with the provisions of this agreement. So as stated earlier, that basically it's a kind of this agreement provides the rights to the member state, that they can take initiative, they can take any affirmative measures to put restrictions on the foodstuff that is entering, or the animals or the plants that are entering, but that is again subject to the condition. It is not kind of right, does not here mean an absolute right, but that is subject to fulfillment of certain conditions, like mainly it is for the protection of human, animal, and plant life and health, as long as they are, but they should not be inconsistent with the provisions of this agreement. Only those measures that are necessary to protect human, animal, and plant life and health are to be applied. They shall be based on scientific principles and shall not be maintained without sufficient scientific evidences. So what has to be in support of these measures? Scientific data, or scientific reasons, scientific testimonies that why these methods are being applied. Measures are not to be arbitrary, discriminatory, unjustified, unnecessary, or disguised barriers to trade. They should not be arbitrary, means without any reasoning. Simply the discretion power has been given to the authority, and the authority, without knowing into the facts, is applying the restriction. So that becomes arbitrary. Discriminatory is between the products belonging to different countries, but for one country there are stricter sanitary and phytosanitary measures in comparison to the other country, although the two countries have same weather conditions, they are from the products that are coming from the same conditions. So there, that will amount to such practice would amount to discrimination. Unjustified, unnecessary, or disguised barriers to trade. So every time putting check in the name of quality or standards, that might be stated as some kind of unjustified, unnecessary, or putting barriers or limitations to the free flow of trade for the reasons favorable to the like domestic products. Members to base their sanitary and phytosanitary measure on international standard, like we have discussed. What should be the criteria for establishing the sanitary measures, or what should be the base points? Let's say it is not like an absolute rule that the international standards are the benchmark, or they should be accepted, but they are like, they can be the guiding source, or let's say the guiding principles for adoption of the rules by any member states. So members to base their sanitary and phytosanitary measure on international standards, guidelines, and recommendations where they exist, and if sufficient, to provide the appropriate level of protection. So the appropriate level of protection has to be provided, which can be in addition to what is provided under the international standards. Members can establish a higher level of protection if scientific justification is provided in accordance with the requirements in Article 5. Now, depending upon the nature of the risk, depending upon the factors that are different than that of the other nations, any member can ask for, or they can apply the higher standards than the international standards. In addition, members are to fully participate in the relevant international organizations, that is codex, like we have discussed just a while ago, IPPC and OIE, within the limits of their resources to promote the development of sanitary and phytosanitary standards. Sanitary and phytosanitary measures that conform to international standards are presumed to be in conformance with the requirement of this agreement and GATT 1994. So, GATT has already accepted this. So, it is now for the member states, or it is the choice of the member states whether they go by these set of international standards or they solely go by their own choices. But in any case, the minimum benchmark is the what is set by these international bodies. Finally, the SPS commitment is to develop procedures to monitor the process of international harmonization and coordinate efforts in this regard with the relevant international organizations. So, how can the SPS committee, that is Sanitary and Phytosanitary Committee, be facilitator in accepting these standards? First is that it can develop the procedure to monitor whether these process of international standards is accepted or not, or the nations that they are framing the standards, that is compatible with these international standards or not, or in case they are going for the higher, then what is the reason or what is the scientific basis of risk assessment based on which they are going for higher level of standard. Otherwise, there can be like protectionism, or it can be some kind of disguised protectionism adopted by the member states. Equivalence. This article, that is Article 4, outlines the concept of equivalence related to sanitary and phytosanitary measure. It states that members shall accept these sanitary and phytosanitary measures of other members as equivalent, even when these measures differ from their own or from those of other members trading in the same products, if the exporting country objectively demonstrate to the importing country that its measure achieve the importing country's appropriate level of sanitary and phytosanitary protection. So, what is the main objective? The protection has to be given, or there has to be no health risks from the products that are coming from the different countries or from the exporting countries. Basically, the objective is that there should be no risk or there should be complete disinfection or free from all kind of infections that may be risk for the health. So, how that method has been adopted, or what different method has been adopted, that becomes the secondary criteria. Therefore, it should be accepted by those importing countries that the methods that are adopted, they may be different, but they have achieved the level of equivalence in getting this no infection, or making it free from infection, or completely making it free from all the bacteria or any such health risks. So, that is mainly covered under Article 4 that allows the members to get for equivalence. Now, why this article is included? Because it could be that members countries having their different criteria or different processes for disinfecting a thing, or for, let us say, making it free from any such risks. They may apply different procedures, but the other countries may apply from different procedures. And because of these procedural differences, or the difference in processes, they can go for the barriers to the trade, or they can go for applying the restrictions to the trade, because the same process or the same procedure has not been adopted. But that is not the goal the sanitary and phytosanitary measures they are going to achieve. The goal is that if it is disinfected, it is free from infection, that it must be accepted, because primarily even sanitary and phytosanitary measures are part of the free trade, this WTO objective of the free trade. So, it should not be like the barrier to the free trade, but it should be facilitator for the free trade. And facilitator here means, although the facilitator in with this with caution, or facilitator with some regulations. So, these regulations are there. The law within this agreement provides certain regulation, and once those regulatory criteria are fulfilled, so why to put restrictions? In other words, the important factor is meeting the importing country's sanitary protection requirements rather than how this is achieved. This concept also serves as a basis for bilateral and multilateral agreement among trading partners on a basis of equivalence referred to the mutual recognition agreement. Now, what methods should be adopted for the other countries to accept the method adopted for this sanitary and phytosanitary measure or for this disinfection. That can be better done through the negotiations between the parties or through the diplomatic channels. So, whenever these matters arises or they come up with for the dispute, primarily it is the dispute settlement body refers for the consultation, or it is suggested that the parties before coming to the panel stage should go for the consultation. And during this negotiation process, during this consultation process, it is possible that the member states, they are able to convince the other party or to convince the importing countries that they have even if they have applied their own procedure or their own process, but still the final results that has been achieved. Risk assessment, this is also very important, because for two reasons. One is for the precautionary measures that are taken, and secondly, when there is no scientific evidence involved, or no scientific evidence available based on the previous data. So, in both the cases, risk assessment is important. Then the question arises whether this risk assessment is discretion can be arbitrary or not. So, it has to be supported by some substantive evidences that what has led the member state to think that there are certain risk factors involved in the import of this product. So, here the sanitary and phytosanitary measures are to be based on assessment of the risks to human, animal and plant life and health using internationally accepted risk assessment techniques. So, that means there has to be certain techniques adopted, but simply it cannot be based on imagination. There has to be some ground realities existing for this risk assessment. Risk assessment should take into account available scientific evidence, because without this it will be totally a theoretical base for applying the restrictions. Relevant processes and production methods, like what is the conventional method of producing the product or for processing a product, that it should be compared with that. And if there is something outside the conventional method, then what can be the negative consequences. If that is known or if that is realized, then that can make the task easier for any product that is produced out of conventional methods, or the production methods that is used is different than what the conventions do apply. Inspection, sampling, testing methods. So, all these are to know the quality of the product, to know the process, how the product is produced, or what can be the effect. If we take the risk, then to what extent there can be the effects of these risks. Prevalence of specific diseases or pests, whether there is existing such disease or there are pests. Ecological, environmental conditions, in what conditions these goods are prepared or these foodstuffs are prepared, what were the environmental conditions in there. Quarantine or other treatment. Quarantine is like if the goods have entered, mainly in the living cases, if the living animals or the living fishes have entered in the territory, then it should be kept for a while in isolation to know the ground realities of that animal, or that, let us say, even plant or any living creature. Risk assessment for animal and plant life or health should take into account economic factors such as cost of control or eradication. Now, here we cannot deny the economic factors that play a very vital role, because the country which is exporting, maybe they are willing to take the measures, but and then there are the measures that are standards or they are in usual practice, but it could be the exporting country has used a new measure or it has adopted a new process for disinfecting a product which is more economically viable for that country, or which is cheaper in that country. So, why not to accept that? It can be that it is of good quality, but it is cheaper because of the conditions in that particular country. So, that economic factor should be taken into consideration. Then is the cost of control or eradication. What will be the amount of cost the country has to bear to control or to eradicate such infection, or any such possible infection, or any such vaccination, or any disinfection that has to be applied. Potential damages or the loss of production or sale, the risks that are involved in case of the potential damages or the loss of production. cost effectiveness of alternative approaches. If new approaches are adopted to cover those risks, or new approaches are required to meet those criteria, then how much expensive that will be. Like we talk in terms of packaging, this can be seen in terms of packaging. This can be the new approaches, or alternative approaches can be seen in terms of processing. So there are a wide range of practices involved, but then all the exporter will adopt those approaches that are economically viable, or even if there is an instruction issued by the importing country that such process should be adopted, but then that becomes the question of bargain for the exporting country, whether it's economically viable or not, or in case it is not economically viable, then it may go for hike in the price of the final product. Sanitary and phytosanitary measures should minimize negative trade effects. So basically, whatever are the negative trade effects, that should be reduced. Negative trade effects, that is impact on the life of animal, humans and plant. In case there are such chances, then that automatically should be reduced by applying the sanitary and phytosanitary rules. Arbitrary or unjustified measures should not be considered, shall not be considered. That means any arbitrary restriction that is imposed by the importing country, that it has no place, or it is not how the sanitary and phytosanitary measures should be adopted. So the decision to restrict the movement of the goods, that should be based on some reasonable basis. Members may provisionally adopt international standards. So in case they have not finalized the standard of their own, depending upon their own geographical conditions, depending upon their own seasonal conditions, or other variants that are applicable in those particular conditions. So they can, for the temporary period of time, they can adopt the international standards that are existing. Protection level shall not be more trade restrictive than that required to provide an appropriate level of protection. So what should be the level of protection, or what should be the level of let us say standardization based on sanitary and phytosanitary measure that is appropriate for covering the risks. So if something of this particular process can be suggested for covering all kind of risks, that there will be no such risk, or for any such disinfection, so that much is enough, not to make it extra cautious, or not to take extra precaution in that reference, and increasing the cost of production, or increasing the cost for the exporter. Explanations of the reasons for the measures may be requested by the member state. So for what reasons they differ with the process, or for what reasons they are suggesting another process instead of the conventional method, that can be like discussed between the parties. Article 6, adaptation to regional conditions. Measures shall be adapted to specific area of the country to minimize the impact on trade. The regional conditions are like within a country, there are sometime in some places are more prone to weather disturbances, more prone to snowy conditions, or some regions are more prone to heat waves. So these are different weather conditions or regional situations that do impact the trade. So that should be adapted to the specific areas. Like what should be adapted? The sanitary and phytosanitary measure. That means, like if the country there is a heavy rainfall, or most of the time during the year that country receives high level of rainfall. So that means there are chances that the air is more moist, and the moisture air they may have the tendency to generate more of the infectious microorganisms. So the sanitary and phytosanitary rules that are applied by the nation, and mainly with regard to the products that will be sent to that particular regions, that can be different than the products if they are sent to the region where there is less rainfall, or the place where that does not remain wet or moist for the number of months in a year. So in that respect, specifications can be done for adaptations based on the regional conditions. Measures shall be adapted to specific areas of the country to minimize the impact on trade. So, that will not require the complete prohibition on the goods or putting very strict conditions on the import or export of the goods. Pest disease free areas shall be identified and recognized. So, what kind of disease a particular region is prone to, or what kind of pests the particular region faces. So, that should be identified and recognized, and based on this the measures, the sanitary and phytosanitary measures should be adopted. Lower prevalence pest disease shall be identified. Exporting countries shall provide information on pest disease free areas. Like we were discussing a while ago, that there are areas that are the areas within the exporting country that are free from infections, and the food or the food stuff is coming from that particular region, although it can be that part of the area of that exporting country is infected. So, if it is transparently informed that the food stuff that is coming from that particular country is from different area other than that where there are infections. So, that will help the nations to adopt flexibility towards their sanitary and phytosanitary rules. So, it can't be that the uniform sanitary and phytosanitary measures that can be applied to the products that are coming from even one particular country, but there can be further specifications depending upon the regions, depending upon the conditions, geographical conditions, climatic conditions, and other factors. Transparency. Members are to notify changes in their sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and they are to provide this information in accordance with the provisions in Annex B of the agreement. So, if there are changes, they are like making the new rules, or they are making different kind of quality analysis. So, all that has to be informed prior to the exporters. So, based on that they can work, or they can do the processing things, and it must be notified in due time. Members are to notify changes in their sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and they are to provide this information in accordance with the provisions in Annex B of this agreement. So, how this information is to be provided, or based on what methods this information is to be provided, it is included in the Annex B of this sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. Now, why it is discussed here? Because when we talk about the transparency, then it should be clear that the changes that are brought, firstly whether they are in compliance with the provisions in Annex B, and then they are well known to the exporter in advance or not. Annex B describes the requirements for transparency to include prompt publication of the regulation. That means, it should be openly public, it should be made public, that is through the publications that it is known. Provision of sufficient lead time for comment from interested parties. So, whoever are the parties, stakeholders, they must be made aware about these changes, and then simply not made aware about, but they should be given due time to comment on these changes, or if they can give some suggestions also, whether these changes there can be whether these changes are acceptable or not, or on what terms and conditions these changes in sanitary and phytosanitary conditions are acceptable to them, because that can change the term of contract also, that can affect the cost of producing, that can also require changes in the processing. So, that it becomes sometimes vital part in the contractual obligations. So, realizing this, and when we are talking about import and export of the goods, that is in bulk, that is in great quantity. So, the prior information about these vital changes is one of the key area that requires transparency to be maintained between the parties. Provision of sufficient lead time for comment from interested parties, establishment of an inquiry point. Okay, if further some details are known or to be ascertained, or further certain details are required, then what is the inquiry point, or what are the sources from where this can be inquired. Adherence to notification procedures, then the notification that are issued by the parties, that should be adhered to, whatever instructions that are given by the parties, that should be like adhered to by these importers and exporters both. General reservations that are related to the confidential information. So, whatever is supposed not to be revealed or not to be made public, that should be maintained in confidence. Following the established notification procedure is very important, where there is no international standard, guidelines or recommendation. Now, in what cases the notification procedure become very important? When the countries, that is the importing country, has not accepted or is not going with any international standard or guidelines or recommendation, but it is following its own guidelines and recommendations, and then it has its own, based on its own data and own factual information, it is trying to set the standard. So, there what it has to do, it has to periodically keep on giving the notifications, periodically keep on giving the suggestions that what is required to be followed. So, that is why it is made clear here that following the established notification procedure is very important, where there is no international standards, guideline or recommendation, or if the proposed sanitary or phytosanitary regulation is not substantially the same as an existing standard, guideline or recommendation. So, where there is a deviation from the existing standard, what was earlier proposed, or there is a change, and sometimes that change could be because of unexpected reasons. So, like let us say the COVID is very big example here, that the kind of safety standards that we like that was later on suggested after this COVID infection, and then after the COVID infection, like the new variants that were coming up. So, that means the new proposals are for the changes are being made, and that means there is a deviation from the existing standards or existing set of standards or guidelines. So, how that can be done? There has to be a prior notification for this. So, that is what it is suggested, or sometime it could be that those variants, the variants of those bacteria or any such microorganisms that leads to infection, they are keep on changing. Like earlier, let us say there was a kind of bacteria that was causing a particular infection to those animals or the birds, and drug has been like invented for that, the cure, and later on after 6 months the new variant of the same bacteria is traced. So, that means the existing drug is no more effective. Therefore, the new notification has to be issued to set the new standards, or to, if not to set the new standard, but to put check on the level of infection, or to make new test for those infections. So, that is what it states. If the proposed regulation is likely to have significant effect on the trade of other members, then the following procedures must be followed. By and large, one country will be the loser if they or rather both the countries will be loser. One will be the loser in economic terms, purely in economic terms, and other will be the loser because there the question of health risks is very vital. The member must publish a notice at an early stage in such a manner as to enable interested parties to be acquainted with the proposal. The members must also notify other members through the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Committee Secretariat of the products to be covered by the regulation, with brief indication as to the objective and rationale for the proposed regulation. So, here the committee of the sanitary and phytosanitary measure has to play a leading role, because the member will notify the other members through that committee of the products that are to be covered through those regulations or a new set of regulations, with a brief indication as to the objective and rationale for those proposed regulations, that for what reasons they are making the changes. Why that has to be informed to the committee secretariat? Because making frequent changes or deviations from the existing rule, that may create mistrust among the parties, and then it requires to be tested whether there is no such intention to create protectionism, or it is not applied on based, these measures are not applied on a discriminatory basis, or even if they are applied on the scientific basis, then the right kind of data was available to them, or right kind of knowledge they had before this deviation was made. Such notification is to be provided at an early stage to allow opportunity for comment. So, prior to taking any measures or steps, what is required, that there must be proper comment. Comment here is for knowing the reasons, because without commenting, or alternative measures. So, without giving chance to both the parties to give their reactions, it won't be legally fair to go by the one sided or unilateral decisions or unilateral suggestions. So, the other parties should be given the chance to comment, and also like to develop the legal reasoning why such methods there is a change in the existing methods, or there are proposals for making changes to such methods. The member is also to make available upon request copies of the proposed regulation, and if possible to identify the parts which in substance deviate from the international standards, guideline or recommendation. Now, it can be that there is a partial deviation, or there are deviations recommended only based on certain conditions. So, all that has to be clearly described through the proper documentation, and identified also. The different conditions are identified, different parts are identified, and the reasons for those deviations must be identified. So, the member is to make available, but that is all this detailed information, or the detailed data is to be made available once the request is made, mainly the concerned parties. The member is also to make available upon request copies of the proposed regulations, and if possible to identify the parts which in substance deviate from the international standard, guideline or recommendations. Finally, the member is to allow reasonable time for the other member to comment in writing on proposal, and provide the opportunity to discuss these comments, and then take into account the comments and the results of the discussion. So, once those deviations have been suggested by, let us say, the importer country. Now, what is the other step, that after this notification of deviation, it is for the other party now to give the comment. So, that commenting should be maybe time taking, because they may comment after knowing the factual situation, after getting the data or their own scientific evidences, or their making their own suggestions in reply to this. So, it takes time, and the reasonable time has to be given to the other party also to respond with their own observations. In the case of urgent or emergency circumstances related to health. Now, at its outset it says, in the case of urgent. Now, once the earlier was some kind of deviation based on, let us say, presumptions, or based on some expectations, but here if something has suddenly happened, or there is an urgency. So, what will be the recourse? Can we expect the time being given to the other party, or what alternative methods can be adopted in such cases? In the case of urgent or emergency circumstances related to health protection, or the threat of the breach in health protection, then the member may omit the step listed above in paragraph 5 of this annex, as long as they do the following instead. So, there we cannot expect the same criteria as it was discussed earlier, like giving reasonable time and then expecting the comment from the other party, and after that drawing the reasonings based on the comments. So, here in case of the emergent situation, or in case of the urgent circumstances, we have to give away with this, and then to go for an alternative method. What is that? Immediately notify other member through Sanitary and Phytosanitary Committee Secretariat of the products to be covered, including brief indication of the objectives and rationale of the regulation, and a description of the nature of the urgency. Now, here again the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Committee will take the leading role. So, if the changes are required because of the emergent situation or urgent situation, it has to be notified to the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Committee. So, the Secretariat of the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Committee, they will be made known of the products for which the changes are required, or changes in the sanitary and phytosanitary rules are required. Through the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Committee Secretariat of the products, these changes are required. to be covered, including brief indication of the objective and rationale of the regulation. So, mentioning there at least briefly the reason for such changes or for what objective these changes are required, and a description of the nature of urgency, and mainly telling them that what are the reasons of this urgent steps, or for this let us say the situations that are considered emergent in nature. Provide to the other members upon request copies of the regulation, that is if the other members they have requested, other members means other WTO members, if they have requested, then to provide them the copies of the regulations. Finally, the member must allow time for the other members to comment in writing and to discuss the proposed regulation, and then take the comment and discussions into account. Now, here they will give time for the other members to comment on those recommendations or on those regulations, and after that they take the comment that is being given by the other members, and make the discussions out of the suggestions the other members are making to it. For the purpose of transparency, the documents are to be provided in one of the three languages of the WTO, that is French, Spanish or English, because they are considered as the language of the WTO institution. So, primarily it can be English, French or Spanish, then only then if the document is produced in either of these three languages, it will be considered that it has been circulated to all the member states. And finally, the Secretariat is required to promptly circulate copies of the notification to all the members and interested international organizations. A central government authority at the national level is to be designated as the responsible organization for the implementation of the notification procedures prescribed in Annexure B. So, the authority has to be designated at the national level as the responsible organization for implementation of the notification procedures as prescribed in Annexure B of this agreement. Now comes the special and differential treatment. Now, special and differential treatment is a kind of clause that was mainly introduced for the developing countries by the developed countries. So, the question was like when the WTO was framed, the countries were classified in terms of developed countries, developing countries, and it was stated that there will be the trade of goods between the developed countries and developing countries. Then all these developing countries are not in equal position. Some of them are at the lower status of their development, some of them are at the middle range, and some of them are at the higher end, quite closer to that of the developed countries. So, how the same parameters can be, or same yardstick can be equitable for all of them, or that can be the viable solution when trading with the developed countries. So, the developed countries they accepted that this special and differential clause should be included, where depending upon the specific condition of a particular developing country, and since developing countries are differential, that means their conditions differ from each other in wide respect. So, considering that difference and the speciality of the particular condition or specific condition of a particular developing country, those flexibilities can be framed. For example, let us say there is a developed country A, or let us say there is a developed country United States or trade bloc, that is European Union. Now, it has to deal with, or it has to do trade with developing countries A, B and C, where there is a wide variance between these three developing countries. So, the kind of flexibility that United States or the European Union is providing to the products from country A, that may be helpful for country A, but the kind of the same kind of flexibilities if provided to country C, let us say, which is almost half of that country's desert. So, that may not be beneficial. So, therefore, the trade relation that is forged between the developed country, whether it is the European Union or the United States, with that of that desert country, which is categorized in the developing country, there extra concessions are required, or special let us say flexibilities are required. So, that will be covered through a general clause, that is special and differential treatment clause. Now, here article 10 includes the special and differential treatment clause in sanitary and phytosanitary measure also. The special and differential treatment, that means the when sanitary and phytosanitary measures are applied by one developing country, they may differ from that of the another developing country depending upon their different situations. So, the depending upon their different situation means here not simply the geographical or the natural conditions, but also the economic situations. The special and differential treatment provisions call for the consideration of the needs of developing and especially the less developed countries when preparing and implementing sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Because if the goods are restricted from the developing country, let us say which is a very or from the less developed country. So, what will how will they export if let us say the European Union standards are imposed on African country or from country like Bangladesh. So, how they will do the export? So, that means they have to create certain new paths, or let us say some channels for in the legal sense that can allow the goods from that developing countries to enter into those developed countries. So, how that can be categorized? That can be categorized depending upon the specific need of those or specific circumstances of that particular developing and the less developed countries. The special and differential treatment provisions call for the consideration of the needs of, that is why the term need has been incorporated here, because that simply is not based on the geographical factors, but also the factors of production and the economic needs. Because basically the purpose with which the WTO agreement are working, that is to create opportunity for the developing and the less developed countries also. And if the sanitary or phytosanitary measures, they instead of creating those opportunities, they create more of the hindrance. That means the whatever was the purpose with which this WTO institution came into existence will be defeated. So, keeping in mind those objectives, the main objectives of the development creating opportunity, then how those opportunities can be created, that is through the regulation of the trade practices. Now, the regulation of trade practices, that depends upon the country, the situation, other factors. So, depending upon that different situations, these special and differential treatment clauses have been included in various agreements of the WTO. The special and differential treatment provision call for the consideration of the needs of developing and especially the less developed countries when preparing and implementing sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Such consideration include providing longer time frames for compliance on the products of interest to developing country members. That means there can be increase in the time period for complying with those standards or other such products that are coming from these developing countries. The Sanitary and Phytosanitary Committee also has the authority to grant, that is the committee which is working in the WTO, instituted under the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Committee. Now, one thing I would like to add here, that all the agreements that are included in the WTO mainframe system, they all have their own committees to supervise the work that is covered under that specific agreement by the member states of the WTO. So, for example, the subsidies will have, the subsidies agreement will have a subsidy committee. The agreement that is to restrict the dumping practices will have their own committee. Likewise, the sanitary and phytosanitary measures will have its own committee to figure out how the member states are working or abiding by the rules and regulations as set by the sanitary and phytosanitary measure agreement. So, in the light of this and covering the special and differential treatment clause here, now comes the responsibility of the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measure Committee. The Sanitary and Phytosanitary Committee also has the authority to grant developing and less developed countries upon their request time limited exceptions in whole or in part from obligations under the agreement. That means they can, the committee members, they can allow them some extra time, but then they must firstly investigate whether that is a genuine cause for them or not. Upon request, time limited exceptions in whole or in part from obligations under the agreement, taking into account their financial, trade and development needs. Developing and least developed country members are also encouraged in this provision to take an active part in the activities of international organization. Now, that is to create chance for them. So, as suggested to you a while ago, that how we can expect immediately after the let us say Afghanistan joining the WTO to go by the standards as set by the European Union. So that is not feasible. So what is required in that case? Some extra time to be given. Developing and the least developed country members are also encouraged in this provision to take an active part in the activities of international organization. So more and more they take participate these new countries or the countries that have recently joined this institution, or they are upcoming countries or upcoming economies. They will be more exposed to the rules, regulations, and the kind of standards that are required in terms of international standards. So the idea is basically to create a harmonized structure for these regulations. It is not that to impose the higher standards upon the developing and the least developed countries, but mainly to make this food stuff, the products that are coming from the animals or the plant, that should be free from this health risk. So that can be those, how that health risks are determined, that are determined by different international institutions. Now those international institutions, they set their standards. So it is for the member states to follow or adopt these standards. So it could be that some member states, depending upon their challenges they are facing or the task they have to do, they may take a bit more of the time. Consultation and dispute settlement. This article informs the provisions of Article 22 and 23 of the GATT 1994 as they are elaborated and applied by the dispute settlement understanding. This shall apply to consultations and settlement of dispute under this agreement. So for now I take your leave and thank you for being part to this discussion. We will continue again after a while. So I thank you for being part to this discussion, and thank you again.
Hello and welcome to this piece of literary snippet. We usually know William Shakespeare as the most revered figure in the history of English literature. But we often tend to forget that he has also been one of the most hated figures in literature. And here I am not talking only about those boys and girls who have to memorize long sections from Macbeth or King Lear or Julius Caesar before they can go and sit for their school or college exams. But I am also talking about people who are themselves quite famous authors. Tolstoy, for instance, considered the writings of Shakespeare to be, and I quote, crude, immoral, vulgar, and senseless. George Bernard Shaw absolutely loathed Shakespeare, as he did Homer. But perhaps no other criticism about Shakespeare is more damaging than the one which says that Shakespeare is a marvelous storyteller, provided someone has told him the story earlier. Now, this piece of criticism is particularly damaging because it is true. None of Shakespeare's plays contain any original story whatsoever. They are all written using pre-existing materials, pre-existing stories. Now, does that diminish the stature of Shakespeare as a dramatist? Well, I'll leave that for you to decide. See you in the next episode of Literary Snippets.